The third big mistake that people will make is that they rely too heavily on notes, or in fact, a lot of times it's just because they rely on notes in the first place. One of the things that I sometimes kind of start a public speaking class with is I'll say something like, so I am so nervous, I'm really, really afraid that I will forget something, so I should make some notes for myself, said pretty much everyone who has ever given a formal speech. I mean, that's kind of a quote that a lot of us can relate to. Here's the big thing that you need to know about notes, though. Notes are not your friend. Notes will hurt you more than they will help you. When people make mistake number one above, so when they try to write out their presentation word for word, they're afraid that they're going to forget something. So as a result, they will try to make notes for themselves, especially if they're trying to memorize the entire speech. They feel like they're going to feel more comfortable if they jot down a few notes. In reality, though, the way that most people will try to ease the tension by making those notes will actually cause more nervousness, not less nervousness. It almost always will make the speaker feel more nervous. And I'll kind of explain why. So, when our eyes move down from making eye contact with the audience down to a piece of paper or notes, a couple things will happen. Number one is you immediately lose connection with your audience. And that visual feedback from your audience is really, really important part of the communication process. So when we say something that the audience agrees with, we receive like subtle cues from them. They're going to give you a slight nod. They're going to nod their head. And that tells us that the audience is in sync with us. They're understanding what we're saying. When we read from a presentation, though, we're constantly looking away from the audience. So we lose that connection with them. When we look back up, we don't see any of those subtle positive cues anymore. And in fact, that lack of comfort will slowly, or in a lot of cases, quickly grow. So since we're not getting those subtle positive cues, where there's more of a disconnect with the audience, all of a sudden we start to feel a little bit more uncomfortable, which makes us want to rely back down to our notes. And now the audience is looking at the top of our head, and then when we feel like we can make contact with the eye contact with the audience again, we kind of look up. So and that happens over and over and over again. And the more of that discomfort that we feel, the more likely we are going to keep referring back to our notes over and over and over again, because that's where we feel more comfortable. So even by the way, even if you don't have something as dramatic as that happen, you still will most likely have some type of negative consequence. A good example of this is what happens sometimes in our presentation skills classes. Now, we show the presenters how to really build confidence speaking without ever having to rely on notes. But some people, they don't have to rely on notes at all. So somebody that goes through the 2-day Fearless Presentations class should be really, really comfortable giving an entire presentation from start to finish without any notes whatsoever, because we show them the step-by-step process to help them get to that point. But still, some people have been relying on notes for so long that it's a hard habit to break. And from time to time, in fact, I'll give you a good example. This is just last Friday. This is just a few days ago. I was teaching a class, and one of my class members did this. Now, of course, this speaker, she started out really strong. And the moment that she finished her current thought, though, instead of mentally processing okay, what am I going to say next internally, and going and just kind of moving on to the next part of her presentation like we taught her to do in the class, she had notes in front of her, so she kind of quickly glanced down. Now, during that split second that she glances down, she's already remembered what she was going to say anyway, so she didn't really have to rely on the notes. But because she's kind of losing that eye contact, that subtle thing that we were talking about before occurs, she's kind of losing that eye contact with the audience, and it's making her a little bit more nervous. That as soon as that nervousness started to grow again, it became kind of like remember that bird back when I was a kid? There was a little bird on the edge of a glass that would kind of dip his beak into water. It was some kind of science toy or something like that. But the bird would just kind of bob its beak into the water glass, and that's kind of what people look like when they have notes. They don't really need them. We don't really need them. But, we kind of glance down. We're not even reading it. We don't even, by the time our eyes get to the paper, we've already remembered what we want to say. And so it's constantly, we're creating that constant disconnect with the audience though. And even though it's not huge, it just makes the presentation much harder. So the good news is that if you just design your presentation better and design a little bit better visual aids, you don't need notes. In fact, just follow some of the instructions that we're giving you on the podcast and in our presentation skills classes and on the blog posts that we do. Just follow a few of those things and it'll make it to where you shouldn't have to rely on notes at all.